start with the campaign to succeed Alistair Adele as Maricopa County Attorney. A special election in November will fill the 2 remaining years of her term. Adele's personal and professional crises over the last 2 years have left the county attorney's office, by many accounts, demoralized and overwhelmed. Democrat Julie Gunnigle lost the 2020 general election to Adele by less than 2 points. In a matter of days last week, she qualified for the August primary. Julie Gunnigle, welcome back to Square Off.
Thanks for having me, Bram.
So you stunned everybody. You were out of the gate within minutes, it seemed, after Alistair Adele resigned. I have to ask, did you have inside information?
Absolutely not. You know, I don't think anybody could have anticipated what has happened in that office over the last week. Everybody knew that potentially her days were numbered because you cannot survive that many scandals, let alone all of these big scandals happening at the same time. But no, we had no idea.
And so it appears your fast start has cleared the field of other Democrats. At least that's what other Democrats are telling me. Is that your sense?
I think that's right.
So you will be the candidate. And you've got the signatures already.
That's correct. So we already have the minimum to make the ballot. We are working now on the buffer just to make sure, but we anticipate being able to file with far more than the threshold and be successful in November.
So bring us up to speed on what you've been doing since we last saw you in November of 2020.
Sure. So in November of 2020, when I lost, and to be clear, no fraud, lost fair and square. But one of the things that I said was that I was going to continue to do the work and the unfinished work of criminal justice reform in our county. So since that time, I've worked as the political director for Arizona Normal, spearheading the expungement efforts in our state. In fact, taught myself how to code, wrote software to help facilitate expungements, and have worked as the legal director for the Arizona Poor People's Campaign, which focuses on the eviction crisis and keeping people in their homes.
Now, politically, then and now, you're a progressive Democrat, and you're running in a sort of purplish Maricopa County where Democrats need to appeal to independents and Republicans peel off some of them in order to win. How does a progressive Democrat do that in this environment and what's going to be a tough year, midterm election?
That's a good question. At first, I think that this office has to transcend politics, right? And that's nowhere more apparent than when we've seen the political prosecutions that originated from this office. This needs to be free of that sort of partisanship nature. And when we talk about the criminal legal system and the reforms that are necessary, those are both Republican and Democratic ideals. We all want fairness, we all want justice, and most importantly, we all want to see this office stop wasting taxpayer money.
Give us a sense, because I think this has been lost in the controversies of the last 2 years. What's this office's mission, and why does it matter to the people of Maricopa County?
Yeah, the mission of this office is to protect the public. And what that looks like is working as the chief prosecutor for a county of over 4.4 million people, keeping our families safe. It also means being the chief of a civil division that has reached national proportions, especially when we talk about what happened with the fraudit and allowing the Senate subpoena to go unappealed in our county. This office should be protecting our residents, and it's not.
So you see this office as having a role to play in things like the partisan audit, when others might say, hang on, that's up to the Attorney General, not the county attorney.
No, it was the county attorney. The county attorney
was advising the county board.
That's right.
So is that the vehicle you'd use, or would you see yourself as an independent player in a situation?
You have to be independent in this situation. This has to be absolutely free of any partisanship. But the law is the law, and that Senate subpoena, they chose to not appeal it, and as a result, we ended up with the fraudit, which again, wastes time, wastes taxpayer money, and sow doubt in the validity of our elections.
So this was a matter of the kind of advice you would have given.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the office itself and the difference between 2020 and 2022. It seems to me it's quite vast. In 2022, the election was focused a lot on policy, plea deals, charging, expungements of convictions. Yet people inside and outside the office right now say the #1 issue has been poor absentee management. Let's listen to Rachel Mitchell for a moment. She's running for county attorney as a Republican and was one of 5 Adele deputies who urged her to resign back in February. Here's what she told me about the office's problems. Let's listen.
You cannot continue to have more and more crime in a larger and larger county with fewer and fewer people and expect the work to get done.
She said the office was demoralized, staffing down 20%, huge backlog of felony cases in the thousands, which hasn't been widely reported. As you know, 180 criminal misdemeanors had to be dropped because the statute of limitations had run out. This is, on the face of it, a huge management problem. What is there in your background that tells voters you have the ability, that you can do this? You've done this before. I've
done this before, Bram. I've spent the off-season organizing teams of attorneys to work expungement clinics, organizing teams of attorneys to keep folks in their homes. But most importantly, the issues with the management in that office have by and large been values-based issues, that the county attorney has not been transparent, the county attorney hasn't been present, and quite frankly, it's shocking to me to hear those words out of Rachel Mitchell's mouth in 2022, when she could have and should have spoken out in 2021, in 2020, in 2019. These are not new issues.
Well, what I hear from others is that these are new issues, or at least they've gotten worse, again, in terms of the management of the office. Huge backlogs of cases being overlooked, a demoralized staff. Again, just management and getting people together is one thing, but dealing with the complexity of cases, the complexity of individual prosecutors, what shows you can manage all that just as a boss?
As a boss, yeah. You know, I've been a bureau chief within a county attorney's office. I know what it's like to manage attorneys, but most importantly, I know what it's like to mentor attorneys and those young attorneys that are leaving, and they are leaving in droves from the county attorney's office, Bram. You're absolutely correct. It's at almost 15% vacancy. But it's largely a problem that there's not any outreach from the top, and these are all top-down issues.
Would you have to clean house if you took over?
I anticipate that that's what the voters would want me to do, that the legacy of lies, corruption, and collusion from the county attorney's office was not just Alistair Adele. She was not the problem. She was a symptom of a much larger problem with how we talk about the criminal legal system and what we expect it to do.
So what would your first message be to the staff? Because I'm not sure I'm hearing much in the way of management, but what would your first message be to the staff on day one if you won?
So I think the message has to be to the attorneys who have fled, and they are hemorrhaging talent right now. Welcome home. If you share the values of working in the interests of justice, if you share the values of working for the protection of victims, the protection of the public, and want to do it in a fair way, welcome back home to the county attorney's office. I can't tell you how many people have reached out over the course of the campaign saying that they are inspired, but that they left because of the leadership of folks like Andrew Thomas, Bill Montgomery, and now Alistair Adele. Okay, I want to end on one specific issue that will come up during the campaign. The Supreme Court's going to rule sometime in June on a major abortion case, reproductive rights case. They could throw out Roe versus Wade. They might not. They might do something else. Arizona does have a more than century-old ban on abortion on the books that might be activated. What would your position be if that ban were activated? Your county attorney should always be working in the interests of justice and prioritizing those cases that do justice for our county and our residents. And that means not prosecuting people for their health care decisions, including abortion.
Wouldn't that be ignoring the law?
Bram, let's not pretend that that's not happening right now. Your county attorney, on every single day that they are in office, makes decisions as to what is in the interests of justice, what is not, what to prosecute, and use our limited county resources, and what isn't worth it in the protection of the public. And I think we need to make a strong statement, not just that Arizonans won't support this, but that it is a waste of resources to prosecute people for their health care decisions.
So you would not prosecute any abortion cases?
No, not ever.
If the 15-week ban is what turns out to be the law as a result of the Supreme Court ruling, would you enforce the ban on abortions after 15 weeks?
No, not ever. And that's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's also because it implicates so many areas of what would be unconstitutional policing. So when you've seen, for example, countries that have gone down this path, who've chosen to criminalize reproductive health care and choice, what you end up seeing is investigations into miscarriages, into stillbirths, into investigations of whether or not somebody intended that their fetus was aborted or died. And it's tragic, but it's also intensely personal. It is policing into the most private areas of people's lives and implicates so much more than just a single case and a single holding. I can't imagine the county attorney wanting to go into a person's doctor's office and demand a physical examination, which would be what would be required were they to enforce this law.
We're going to have to leave it there. Julie Gunnigle, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck.
Thank you, Graham.